Good morning, everybody, or afternoon, depending on what time zone you're in. My name is Shelley Smith, and I am part one of the host of the Culture Hour, the owner of Premier Rapport, where everything about culture matters. My partner in crime, Elizabeth Valise, is out in the field today doing her thing. So we miss her, but we'll see her again next week or the week after for another just one-on-one with Elizabeth and I to sort of catch up on everything that's in the news. But today, I'm really thrilled and honored to introduce Gail Miller. Gail Miller should be a name that you're familiar with. If not, all you have to do is type in her name and TED Talk and many more things will pop up. We are thrilled to have her on the show today to talk about everything culture related. And I'm also happy to announce that Gail is our keynote opening speaker at the local Peninsula SHRM Strategic Full Day Conference in September, being held at CNU there in Newport News on campus. So without further ado, Gail Miller. Gail, tell us a little bit about yourself, maybe some things that folks don't know, or you decide what you want us to know today.
Well, first, I want to say thank you, Shelley, for having me. Well, I'm Gail Miller, and I have over 20 years of recruiting and career coaching experience. And you mentioned my TED Talk, and I did my TED Talk on unconscious bias in recruiting. And I kind of lift the layers of what goes on in recruiting and some of the reasons why candidates are not hired, and I kind of shed light on it because a lot of times candidates are left in the dark as like, why didn't I get this job? I thought I nailed it. And it's not always what they did wrong. It's just the unconscious bias that kind of creeps in on us. Everyone has it.
Yeah.
As recruiter hiring managers. So I gave a very frank and honest view of it and gave some really good examples and some ways to combat that on a daily basis.
So what are some of the, maybe just one or two top immediate tips that sort of come off your head of things that maybe people do to help overcome some of those biases, or are there signals maybe? I don't know.
Well, the first thing is definitely self-awareness. Because what happens with unconscious bias, we have so many thoughts in our brain at any given time, but we can only handle a couple.
Right.
So what happens is when you can only handle a couple, your brain makes shortcuts and you always revert to what feels comfortable or what you know. So you make assumptions based on your history and your experiences, and that's natural. So you have to be self-aware of what that is and kind of catch yourself. So self-awareness is the number one thing first. That's the first step.
Makes sense.
Because if you're not self-aware, it's going to be difficult.
Exactly.
The second thing is something that I call, and it's in my talk, I'm kind of giving it away if you haven't seen it. It's called So What? And a lot of things that we judge candidates on, or even people or relationships, everything in our lives, we all have judgments.
Yeah.
We make more of it than it really is. So I call it the so what test, and I'll give you an example.
Okay.
The example that I give in my TED Talk is, and this, everything that I said that happened in my TED Talk is true. Like people are like, oh, you're lying, this never happened. Oh, some of these things, all these things. And I worked at it, my story's in there. So the story is that there was a candidate and she wore white pumps right after Labor Day. And she was amazing. She was the perfect candidate. I just thought for sure she would be hired. There was absolutely no reason not to hire her whatsoever.
Right.
And the hiring manager said, I don't know, there's just something, I can't quite put my finger on it. And when they say that, you're like, oh boy, there's something going on.
Yes.
And then she said, did you notice she's wearing white pumps? You don't wear white pumps after Labor Day. And I just, boom, knew it.
Yeah.
I knew it right then and there. She couldn't get over that. She wasn't doing it on purpose, though. It wasn't purpose. But it's somehow in her brain, it was a judgment that was so deep in her that she couldn't get over it.
Yep.
So I say, so my test is, so what? So what if she's wearing white pumps after Labor Day? How is that going to affect her doing the job. And that's how we always have to revert back is this affecting how this person is going to do the job? So if they come to work and they're wearing white pumps after Labor Day and it bothers you, maybe it's you. Like, you have to get over it, right? Like,
Yes.
you have to deal with it because we work with all different types of people and we interface with all different people with different cultures and different upbringing. You're not always going to mesh with them. You're not always going to like what they're doing.
Are
And
there some, let me interrupt you for a second, because a couple of key points. When you see that happening, either literally at the moment or afterwards, and you're able to interject your so whats, have you found success on sort of calling that out to get the person hired, to get that person who's doing the judgment and the bias sort of off of that, to realize the error in their thinking?
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
Give us one of those. Give us maybe something that you've done or a story around that.
Yeah, so I actually had a client. I don't know what it is with the shoes. Like, shoes.
Now you're making me paranoid about my shoes.
Now it's like crazy. So I had a client who this candidate came in and she was wearing, is it Crocs maybe?
Yeah, like the rubber.
Like
yeah.
Yeah, but they weren't quite that. I don't know what you would call it, but that style.
Okay.
She goes in there, she does a great job, and she, the hiring manager said to me, I just want you to be aware, this is something I'm having a very difficult time getting over. She's interviewing for an HR position and she's showing up in these shoes. And I kind of get it. Like, you're judging that.
Yeah.
And I said, okay, let me get to the bottom of this, because maybe there's a reason for it. And we really have to think, does it really matter? Okay. Because if there's a dress code, then you could always change that and say, you can't be wearing Crocs. But she's like, it's still bad, a judgment call. So I call, the candidate, and she said, look, I had surgery on my feet and she couldn't wear pumps. And I said, well, I wish you would have told me that in advance,
right?
Because I would have told that to the client. And she said, oh yeah, I would never show up like that, but I did for medical reasons. And then I went back and I told the client, and the client was fine with it, and they hired her.
Beautiful.
But if they didn't have that person in between, she might not have gotten the job. I mean, I do think in that situation, a candidate should have just said, look, I'm not dressed the way I typically would. But even if it wasn't, let's just say she didn't have that issue.
Right.
And she did show up. So much of how we judge people is so superficial.
Yes, it is.
And a lot of people will argue, well, you're not supposed to do that. It's not professional and that's bad judgment. But who are you to say that that's bad judgment? So when you say so what, the big thing about so what is that it allows you to focus on what matters.
I love
what's important.
I use the so what on behavioral assessment when the reports come out and everybody's like, yeah, that's me. I'm like, well, that's great. Not to be funny, but I already knew that was you because it's a valid, study. But so what? What are we going to do with it? What does it mean now? So I love that. And I have to tell you that both of your stories resonate with me personally as something that happened last week. I chose to wear a new pair of shoes when I was going to be walking really long places in DC, and that was really silly on me. I should have done the city girl thing and had my multiple shoes and then get in and swapped. I didn't do that. At any rate, my feet ended up a hot mess, and I had back-to-back speaking. So the next day, I had to go get tennis shoes, and I had tennis shoes on for my keynote speaking, but I was very embarrassed, but I got up and said, this is what happened. I turned a funny story into it. And then I was able to, it was uncomfortable for me because I thought the very thing that you're talking about, I'm going to be judged. So I chose to, make fun of myself a bit and just sort of call it out. And then the other thing is I had a podcast piece like this for a taping it was actually a webinar, and we had received some feedback, and the feedback was that from somebody was that I reminded this person of someone else and they just couldn't get over it and they couldn't move on. And that was her feedback. And I was like, okay, wow. Ooh.
Oh
So
boy.
yeah. And so at any rate, I definitely get that. I've been a part of that. And I'm quite sure that I have unconsciously done that myself. And 2 or 3 weeks ago, we actually had on the Culture Hour, Elizabeth and I really got into a conversation about the clothing in the interview. And the person that we had on is a sales process expert. And so we talked about, the different things of the uniforms and the judging. It was really interesting to, especially today, the workers in the different environments are far different, but when is it okay to not show up in a suit? And so it's just interesting that this whole thing has come, back. And I have this conversation with my 2 older children as I go into job interviews all the time because of the biases that happen. So it's not going to go away. There's, you can't just wave a magic wand and get somebody over it. But I love your approach of the so what when you're in there. Is there anything that you could give? Our time has gone by so fast. We're almost at 20 minutes. Is there anything that you could give the listeners today, some sort of final thoughts about either the so what to sort of help themselves above and beyond the self-awareness, or maybe some self-awareness questions to ask themselves? I don't know. Any thoughts that you could give to that? And then please let the viewers know the best way that they could contact you or catch you at a live event, other than obviously coming to the one here in September. But I'll turn it back over to you for some closing thoughts and contact information.
Okay, great. Well, I just want everyone to know that regarding the so what, it's just much bigger than, HR and recruiting. It's about using that in your everyday life and really focusing on what matters so you live a more fulfilled life. Because so much of our day is filled with minutia and worrying about things that just bog us down, that just don't matter, that have really no effect. We make things bigger than they are. So the next time you get worried over something, just say, so what? Just so what? I'm going to focus on what makes me happy, what's important. It's not the end of the world. My nail broke. Oh my gosh. So what? Move on to the next. On to the next. So it's like, so what? On to the next.
I love that.
And that's how we need to live our lives. And the next thing is, regarding bias, try to understand bias, do research on bias. And if you're interviewing, use it to your advantage. And it's called, and they can look it up, affinity bias.
Beautiful.
Because we like to hire people that are similar to us. So use that, do research, find out everything about the person you're interviewing with, and try to find a commonality so they feel comfortable hiring you, because people like to hire people like themselves. So that's my tip.
Love it.
That's
Love it.
Today.
And how do we find you?
So I have 2 websites, Consult Networks with an X. That's the strategic staffing part of my business. And then I have Career Networks, that website, and that is for my career coaching, executive coaching. And then I also have the sowhatrev.com website as well. My email is gmiller@consultnetworks.com. That's the best way to get a hold of me.
Beautiful.
And I'm on LinkedIn and Instagram and Twitter and, all the social media websites. So
thank you so much. And I definitely love your so what, and we'll continue to do that. And I think it's great just on, like you said, on a personal level, when you start to get tied up and caught into things. And I forget where I heard this years ago, but it's getting caught up in the details that don't matter is like trying to straighten the chairs on the sinking Titanic.
I love that.
So thank you so much for your time today. We really look forward to seeing you again at the Peninsula SHRM live in September. It's the 3rd Thursday of September, and it's a full day conference, and Gail is teeing it up and going to get the group going. And I can't wait for the conversation because I know it's going to be a great one. So until next time, my name is Shelley Smith, and I'm going to say goodbye from Elizabeth Valise as well. But stay tuned for the next Culture Hour. And I'm the owner of Premier Rapport, because remember, culture matters. Thanks, everybody, and have a great day. And again, thank you, Gail.
Thank you, Shelley.